November 12, 1942, the Western Desert, North Africa. A seized American transport sat derelict near a pulverized British provisioning train. Its occupants had absconded when their position became untenable. Standard Wehrmacht procedure dictated its demolition or abandonment. However, the reconnaissance troops' superior officer harbored alternative intentions. "Procure our foremost technician. I require an assessment of this apparatus's utility." The revelations that the Africa Corps mechanics unearthed over the ensuing 30 minutes would dismantle their deeply held convictions regarding German preeminence. The understanding dawned not as a sudden epiphany, but as a gradual assimilation, solidifying with each meticulous examination. A modest plaque affixed to the dashboard declared, "Willys MB." The Americans referred to it as a Jeep. The initial disclosure materialized upon lifting the hood. The engine bay exuded immaculate order, engineered for swift servicing by individuals possessing rudimentary mechanical aptitude. Color-coded wiring, unequivocally identified components, and accessible parts requiring no specialized implements. In 2 decades of maintaining German military materiel, the senior mechanic had never encountered such judicious design for field repairs. Every fastener conformed to a universal standard. Each element appeared identical to its counterpart in any other vehicle of its designation. Conceived for high-volume manufacturing and effortless substitution, the Go Devil engine boasted a displacement of 134 cubic inches, generating 60 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute. While not exceptionally potent by German metrics, the underlying engineering ethos was transformative. This engine was not crafted for flawless precision. It was forged for inherent simplicity, unwavering dependability, and, above all, replicability. A technician with minimal instruction could service this engine utilizing basic instruments, devoid of specialized wrenches or convoluted protocols demanding factory-certified personnel. It was evident the Americans had conceived this conveyance, anticipating that agricultural laborers and factory operatives would undertake its upkeep amidst battlefield exigencies. By November 1942, the disparity in the philosophies guiding American and German military vehicle development had become pronounced. America would ultimately produce in excess of 640,000 Jeeps throughout the conflict. Germany would manage a mere 50,000 Kübelwagen. Yet more unsettling was the symbolic weight this divergence carried. The Jeep epitomized the apex of American industrial ingenuity, standardized, simplified, engineered for mass assembly by a semi-skilled workforce employing interchangeable components. The officers approached as the mechanics continued their scrutiny. "Well, is it serviceable?" The senior mechanic looked up, carefully choosing his words. "This vehicle is exceptional. It is the product of someone intimately familiar with operational environments." One officer evinced a frown. German engineering represents the pinnacle of global craftsmanship. The mechanic offered no rebuttal. He simply gestured towards the 4-wheel drive mechanism. "Observe this transfer case. A solitary lever initiates 4-wheel drive engagement. One lever. Our Kübelwagen vehicles necessitate multiple manipulations, and the majority lack 4-wheel drive capability altogether." The Wehrmacht's principal light conveyance, the Volkswagen Type 82 Kübelwagen, was, in numerous aspects, a commendable machine. Ferdinand Porsche had designed it with characteristic German meticulousness. It possessed a lighter chassis than the Jeep, consumed less fuel, and its air-cooled power plant obviated the vulnerability of radiators to enemy ordnance. However, it harbored a singular, critical deficiency. It operated exclusively in rear-wheel drive. In the yielding sands of North Africa, the mountainous terrain of Italy, or the mire of Russia, this limitation proved calamitous. The Jeep, conversely, could propel all 4 wheels as needed. The system's design was so straightforward that an individual with limited formal education could master its operation within minutes. The mechanics proceeded with their evaluation. The suspension system employed rudimentary leaf springs, a stark contrast to the Kübelwagen's sophisticated torsion bars, yet infinitely more amenable to field repairs. The electrical infrastructure was basic, yet resilient. The fuel delivery system could operate on virtually any octane gasoline without modification. Most disquieting was the weight distribution. The Jeep tipped the scales at approximately 2,450 pounds, contrasted with the Kübelwagen's 1,540 pounds, a discrepancy of 910 pounds. German engineers would likely have deemed this superfluous mass a detriment, diminishing performance and escalating fuel consumption. Yet, the mechanics perceived the rationale underpinning this apparent imprudence. That augmented mass translated directly into enhanced durability. The chassis was over-engineered, designed to withstand stresses that would incapacitate lighter vehicles. The Americans had prioritized resilience under duress above optimal efficiency. They had constructed a vehicle expecting it to endure maltreatment, overload, and conditions no engineer would countenance, and meticulously engineered it to persevere regardless. This was not the American ineptitude depicted in Wehrmacht training documentaries. This was engineering oriented towards pragmatism rather than abstract theory. The unit transported the Jeep to their forward installation. Over the subsequent 3 days, mechanics conducted exhaustive assessments. They navigated it through yielding sands where Kübelwagens faltered. They overloaded it beyond its designated capacity. They subjected it to abuse that would have crippled most vehicles. The Jeep absorbed every trial. In soft ground, where rear-wheel drive vehicles demanded cautious navigation and frequently became immobilized, the Jeep simply powered through. Its low-range gearing permitted it to traverse obstacles at a walking pace, an ability the Kübelwagen's transmission, despite its reduction gears, could not replicate. Word disseminated throughout the Afrika Korps. The Americans possessed a conveyance that surpassed the Wehrmacht's counterpart in nearly every significant regard. Officers and mechanics from other formations convened to inspect it. The responses followed a predictable sequence, initial skepticism yielding to reluctant admiration, culminating in dismay as the ramifications became apparent. A supply officer, who had been employed in German automotive factories prior to the war, dedicated an afternoon to scrutinizing the vehicle. His assessment was stark. This signifies a fundamental divergence in approach. We construct vehicles striving for engineering perfection. The Americans construct them for manufacturability. In total war, that distinction holds paramount importance. He elaborated to the assembled officers and non-commissioned officers on the implications of this difference. Examine this engine block. It is cast, not machined to exacting tolerances. The Americans relinquish a marginal degree of performance for substantial gains in production velocity. They can train a semi-skilled operative to assemble one of these engines in a fraction of the time required to construct a German engine. Now, extrapolate this across every component. He indicated the pressed metal body panels. These panels are rudimentary compared to our vehicles, but they can be produced by the thousands in factories that previously manufactured domestic appliances. The Americans have mobilized their entire industrial complex. Every refrigeration plant, every washing machine factory, every commercial vehicle manufacturer, all redirected towards military output. We are incapable of matching this volume. The officers fell into a contemplative silence. He had articulated a suspicion many had begun to entertain. Germany's doctrine of quality and precision had seemed logical during peacetime. However, in the crucible of total war, the American methodology of delivering adequate products swiftly was proving devastatingly effective. One mechanic dedicated that evening to composing a comprehensive technical report. He meticulously documented every facet of the Jeep's design, noting both its strengths and its shortcomings. The report ascended the command hierarchy, joining thousands of similar documents generated by German technical intelligence services. Comparable reports were inundating Wehrmacht headquarters from every theater of operations. German mechanics and engineers were encountering American vehicles and equipment with increasing frequency, and the evaluations were uniformly troubling. The Americans were outproducing Germany by ratios that appeared insurmountable. In late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence commissioned an investigation into Allied vehicle production. The findings substantiated their gravest apprehensions. American factories were manufacturing military vehicles at a rate of thousands per diem. Ford's Willow Run facility alone was completing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. American shipyards were launching Liberty vessels at a pace exceeding Germany's capacity to interdict them. The statistics unveiled a somber verity. America's 1942 military vehicle output surpassed the combined production of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Furthermore, production was still accelerating. The captured Jeep attained a status akin to a celebrity within its unit. Soldiers vied for the opportunity to pilot it. Officers utilized it for vanguard reconnaissance, placing greater reliance on its dependability than on their own vehicles. When components deteriorated, replacements were readily salvaged from other captured Jeeps with disconcerting ease. Every element was interchangeable. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps had acquired dozens of Jeeps. Wehrmacht mechanics established informal communication channels, disseminating maintenance knowledge and scavenged parts. An illicit market emerged for captured American materiel. A functional Jeep commanded prices far exceeding its theoretical worth, as its superiority for desert engagements was universally acknowledged. Then came May 13, 1943, the day the Afrika Korps capitulated in Tunisia. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners of war. Their campaign was concluded, but their education in American industrial capacity was only just commencing. The disparity between German and American capabilities became impossible to disregard during the transit to captivity. American trucks conveyed prisoners in numbers that would have necessitated horse-drawn transport within the Wehrmacht. American Liberty ships, typically constructed within 5 to 6 weeks at peak 1943 output, compared to an initial 8 months, transported thousands across the Atlantic. Every aspect of the logistical operation demonstrated an organizational prowess that dwarfed anything Germany had achieved. At the prisoner processing center in Oran, Algeria, captured mechanics observed American motor pool sergeants maintaining a fleet of vehicles with an unconcerned efficiency that would have been inconceivable within the Wehrmacht. The motor pool housed dozens of jeeps, trucks, and command vehicles. Young American soldiers, many barely past adolescence, performed maintenance with speed and assurance. Tools were abundant and readily accessible. Parts arrived without requisition delays. Every vehicle utilized the same fundamental components, enabling mechanics to service any unit without specialized expertise. A solitary American sergeant, conversant in rudimentary German, noticed a captured mechanic observing, "Are you a mechanic?" "I was with Afrika Korps vehicle maintenance." The sergeant grinned. "Well, your war is over, but I wager you have questions. Come along, I'll give you the grand tour. You can't exactly pilfer anything now." What ensued was an enlightening afternoon. The sergeant guided him through the motor pool, expounding on American maintenance philosophy with unvarnished candor. "See, the essence is, we design everything so any farm boy can fix it. Most of our lads had never even seen a vehicle engine before basic training, so we make it simple. Color-coded wires, standard bolts, everything labeled. We have manuals written for a 6th grade reading level. The intent is that if something malfunctions, anyone can rectify it without summoning a specialist." The captured mechanic examined a disassembled Jeep engine. Each component bore clear markings. The maintenance manual contained detailed illustrations and sequential instructions comprehensible to an individual with minimal mechanical understanding. "How many of these do you manufacture?" The sergeant shrugged. "Heck, I don't know the precise figures, but I'd estimate thousands each week. They keep rolling off the production lines faster than we can dispatch them. We have so many Jeeps that if one breaks down, we typically just acquire another, rather than fixing it immediately." Thousands every week. The number seemed staggering, yet the evidence was pervasive. The motor pool contained more vehicles than entire German divisions had fielded in North Africa, and this represented merely one small American contingent at a forward supply depot. The sergeant continued the tour. Dodge trucks capable of hauling loads that would necessitate 2 German vehicles, half-track personnel carriers produced in quantities that render their German counterparts exceedingly rare, tank transporters that can convey armor without exacerbating track wear. The principle is that we learned from the Great War. We construct everything using common parts. A bolt from a Jeep fits a truck, fits a half-track. The same applies to electrical components, hydraulic systems, everything. It simplifies logistics. Instead of requiring 1,000 different parts, we need perhaps a couple hundred, and we produce them in the millions. This was the secret that German manufacturing had never fully grasped. Component commonality was not solely about production efficiency. It was about establishing a logistical ecosystem where any part could be deployed universally. Any mechanic could service any vehicle, and the entire system reinforced itself. The journey from North Africa to American POW camps continued this profound education. At every juncture, prisoners witnessed American industrial capacity operating on a scale that defied German preconceptions. The port at Norfolk, Virginia, processed thousands of tons of supplies daily with mechanical precision. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at speeds that would have required vast labor forces in Hamburg. Trains conveyed prisoners across America in passenger carriages that would have been considered luxurious in Germany. And vehicles were ubiquitous. Automobiles filled parking lots adjacent to factories. Trucks lined highways in convoys extending for miles. Military vehicles occupied depot yards by the thousands, awaiting shipment to combat zones. At Camp Hearn, Texas, skilled mechanics volunteered for motor pool duties. American camp commanders welcomed their expertise, as the war effort demanded every available worker. For the ensuing 2 years, German mechanics labored alongside American soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that sustained the camp's operations. American mechanics approached vehicle upkeep with direct practicality. They were not engineers pursuing perfection. They were problem solvers focused on ensuring equipment functionality. When something failed, they rectified it promptly with whatever resources were at hand. When parts were unavailable, they improvised. When a vehicle proved irreparable, they cannibalized it for components and requested a replacement, which arrived within days rather than weeks. The captured mechanics diligently observed American methodologies. German mechanics were trained to service vehicles according to factory specifications, necessitating specialized instruments and precise protocols. American mechanics were instructed to maintain operational status by any expedient means. Under peacetime conditions, German methods yielded superior results. In the chaos of wartime, American methods proved vastly more effective. The motor pool at Camp Hearn processed hundreds of vehicles monthly. Jeeps arrived for routine maintenance, received servicing in hours rather than days, and were returned to active duty. The efficiency stemmed from an abundance of parts and component interchangeability. When a component required replacement, the parts room stocked dozens of units. When a tool was needed, the tool room provided it instantaneously. When a vehicle was beyond repair, another took its place. One German mechanic formed an acquaintance with an American soldier who had previously been employed at Ford. The American proved knowledgeable regarding the automotive sector. Prior to the war, I worked on the assembly line at Willow Run. That's Ford's bomber facility outside Detroit, the largest factory in the world. We were constructing B-24 Liberators. Production commenced in '42, and by the time I was drafted last year, we were completing one bomber every hour. Every single hour, a fully assembled 4-engine heavy bomber rolled off that line. The arithmetic was astonishing. 24 bombers daily, over 700 per month. How is such output achievable? Mass production principles. Mr. Ford devised a method for deconstructing complex manufacturing processes into simple, repeatable steps. You don't require skilled artisans if each worker performs one uncomplicated task repetitively. A youth fresh from the farm can be trained in a week to install a particular type of bolt in a specific location. Multiply that by 1,000 workers, and you achieve immense output. This was the fundamental distinction. German production relied on skilled artisans constructing high-quality products in moderate quantities. American production depended on semi-skilled laborers assembling adequate products in colossal quantities. The American continued. It's the same with Jeeps. Willys Overland manufactures them. So does Ford. Both plants adhere to identical specifications. Consequently, a Willys Jeep part fits a Ford Jeep perfectly. They are entirely interchangeable. This means if one plant sustains damage from bombing or encounters difficulties, the other continues production. Maintenance is straightforward because every mechanic learns one vehicle, not dozens of variations. The German mechanic reflected on the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory. Numerous distinct truck models from various manufacturers, each with unique parts and maintenance requirements. Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from diverse sources, captured vehicles from across Europe, each demanding its own specialized spare parts and knowledge base. German logistics presented a bewildering array of incompatible systems. American logistics were streamlined through uniformity. The true brilliance lies in our design for manufacturability from the outset. When they issued the requirements for the Jeep back in '40, they gave companies a mere 75 days to produce a prototype. American Bantam accomplished it in 49 days. Then Willys and Ford refined the design for mass production. Everything had to be simple to fabricate, simple to maintain, and simple to repair. The captured mechanics had examined a sufficient number of Jeeps to recognize this truth. The vehicle lacked elegance. German engineers would have conceived something more intricate, but complexity hindered mass production, and mass production was prevailing in the war. By the summer of 1944, prisoners had overheard rumors of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. Upon receiving news of the landing's success, many felt no astonishment. The Allies possessed the manufacturing capacity to assemble an invasion fleet that would have required Germany years to muster. News filtered into the camps via American newspapers and radio broadcasts. They perused accounts of the Normandy beaches, where Allied forces had landed with thousands of vehicles in the initial wave alone. Jeeps, trucks, tanks, amphibious transports, all conveyed across the English Channel in purpose-built landing craft, themselves manufactured in the thousands. The sheer magnitude of the operation defied comprehension. 6,000 vessels, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first assault wave. Within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be engaged in combat across Europe, all supported by a production base that generated materiel at a rate faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. German prisoners contemplated their pre-war confidence in victory. That confidence had been predicated on assumptions of German technological supremacy. Those assumptions proved to be incomplete. Germany possessed superior engineering in many domains. German tanks boasted heavier armor and superior armament compared to most American equivalents. German aircraft were often more sophisticated. German small arms were excellent. However, None of that mattered when America could produce 5 tanks for every one Germany manufactured, 10 trucks for every German truck, 100 Jeeps for every Kübelwagen. In the motor pool one afternoon, prisoners observed American soldiers loading Jeeps onto transport trucks for conveyance to the port. A young private drove each Jeep up the loading ramps with casual assurance. Dozens of vehicles were loaded in under an hour, all destined for Europe to replenish losses and equip new formations. One German mechanic realized that this single loading operation at one camp in Texas represented more vehicles than his entire division had commanded in North Africa. This scene was being replicated at camps and depots across America every single day. The mathematics became irrefutable. Germany had converted its entire economy to a war footing, diverting resources from civilian needs to bolster its military production. Despite this immense effort, the output of German military vehicles in 1943 was less than 100,000 units across all categories. In stark contrast, America, while maintaining a robust civilian economy, manufactured over 2 million military vehicles during that same year. This was not merely a difference in quantity, but also in quality. American vehicles were conceived with the demands of wartime in mind, emphasizing ease of repair, standardized components, straightforward operation, and robust durability. Conversely, German vehicles were engineered to specifications that made sense in peacetime but proved unwieldy and impractical during sustained combat. In November of 1944, word reached the camp of a new German offensive in the Ardennes, an operation that would come to be known as the Battle of the Bulge, representing Hitler's final desperate gamble in the West. This offensive was heavily reliant on seizing American fuel reserves, as Germany itself lacked sufficient fuel to support its armored operations. Even more disquieting were reports concerning Operation Grief, a commando mission orchestrated by Otto Skorzeny, which involved the use of captured American equipment. German soldiers were deployed in captured jeeps, clad in American uniforms and armed with false identification, with the objective of infiltrating Allied lines to sow confusion and seize crucial bridges. The fact that even Skorzeny, a favored commando of Hitler's who had previously rescued Mussolini, was compelled to depend on American vehicles due to the insufficiency of German-made ones, spoke volumes about the dire material circumstances of the Wehrmacht. The operation ultimately failed. American military police swiftly identified the German infiltrators by posing carefully constructed questions about American culture and standard procedures. The Ardennes offensive itself faltered, not primarily due to American resistance, though that was fierce, but because German forces were depleted of fuel. Panzer divisions were forced to abandon their tanks when their supply trucks failed to arrive. Infantry units resorted to horse-drawn transportation as motorized logistics systems had collapsed entirely. By January of 1945, the German assault had been contained and repelled. The spring of 1945 brought tidings of Germany's imminent collapse. The Red Army advanced on Berlin from the east, while American and British forces breached the Rhine and pushed deep into Germany from the west. In the camp's motor pool, German mechanics continued their duties, servicing vehicles for an army that had been defeated, an army that was no longer their own. They felt neither pride nor shame in their work. Germany had not lost due to a lack of courage or skill on the part of its soldiers, but rather because it had dared to challenge powers whose industrial capacity it could never hope to match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier approached with news. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The mechanics acknowledged this with nods. They had anticipated this outcome for months. What would become of them? They were told they would eventually return home, though not immediately, as considerable logistical arrangements were necessary. One mechanic contemplated this prospect: home to a Germany reduced to rubble by relentless bombing, occupied by foreign powers, its cities shattered by the very manufacturing prowess that had produced the Jeep he had examined years prior. The American soldier then posed a direct question. "You're an intelligent fellow. Did you genuinely believe Germany could prevail?" The mechanic considered his response carefully. "Before the war, yes. We believed German quality would triumph over American quantity. We had encountered American products before the war, and many were inferior to their German counterparts. We assumed American military equipment would follow the same pattern. However, that was not the case. No. When we examined that initial Jeep in 1942, we recognized a fundamental error in our thinking. We had conflated peacetime quality with wartime efficacy. Your Jeep was not inherently better engineered than our Kübelwagen in absolute terms. It was superior in its design for mass production and operational conditions in the field. In total war, that proved to be the decisive factor." The American soldier nodded in agreement. "Yes, we produce adequate items rapidly and in vast quantities." "Precisely," the mechanic replied. They stood in silence for a moment, two mechanics from opposing sides, united by a shared comprehension of what had truly dictated the war's outcome. The process of repatriation commenced in late 1945. German prisoners boarded ships for their journey home. One mechanic arrived in Bremen in January of 1946, undergoing processing at Allied control points before his eventual release. The city was a ruin. Devastation stretched in every direction. Yet, amidst the destruction, he observed something striking. American vehicles were ubiquitous. Jeeps transported Allied officers through the devastated streets. Trucks delivered vital relief supplies. Motor pools bustled with activity, where German civilians worked alongside Allied soldiers. He approached one such motor pool, introducing himself to the American captain in charge. His English, acquired during years of captivity, was functional. "Sir, I am a former Oberfeldwebel of the Afrika Korps, recently repatriated from Camp Hearn, Texas. I am a trained vehicle mechanic with experience in maintaining American equipment. Are you employing civilian personnel?" The captain reviewed his identification papers. "It states here you worked in our motor pool in Texas. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. 2 years." The captain made a note. "We are in desperate need of mechanics. Most German mechanics either perished in the war or are still in POW camps. You can commence tomorrow. Payment will be in occupation script, which can be exchanged for rations and essential goods." And so, the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself employed by the very army he had once fought against, maintaining the same vehicles he had once scrutinized as enemy materiel. The Allies required skilled mechanics, and he needed employment. The war was over, and life continued. Over the subsequent months, he witnessed the initial stages of Germany's reconstruction. American aid flowed in, distributed with the same efficiency that had characterized their wartime victory. Food, medical supplies, and construction materials arrived, all transported in American trucks and coordinated by American planners who approached Germany's rebuilding process with systematic rigor. He worked in the motor pool, instructing young Germans in American maintenance practices. Many of his trainees were former Wehrmacht soldiers like himself, men who now required civilian skills in a Germany that no longer possessed a military. He imparted the lessons he had learned through his own experiences: simplicity over complexity, functionality over perfection, tangible results over theoretical approaches. These were insights gleaned from American vehicles, applicable to the vital task of rebuilding German manufacturing. By 1947, he had been promoted to supervisor of the motor pool's German civilian staff. The American captain who commanded the facility treated him with respect, valuing his experience and organizational acumen. One evening, the captain invited him to share a drink in his office. "I've been contemplating something," the captain began. "You've worked extensively with both German and American vehicles. If you were to design a vehicle for the new Germany, What would it be like? He considered the question carefully. I would adapt the American approach for European conditions. Smaller than a Jeep, more fuel efficient, but retaining the same core philosophy. Standardized parts, straightforward maintenance, designed for ease of production rather than for engineering accolades. Europe has narrow roads and limited fuel, but we require the dependability of American design principles. The captain nodded thoughtfully. That's astute. Marshall Plan funds will facilitate the rebuilding of German manufacturing, and German engineers are already studying American methodologies. The future lies in American-style mass production, tailored to local requirements. This prediction proved remarkably accurate. In the decades that followed, West German manufacturing embraced American production philosophies while retaining a keen German focus on quality. The result was an economic renaissance that transformed Germany from a devastated nation into an industrial powerhouse. Companies such as Volkswagen, which had produced the Kübelwagen during the war, evolved into global automotive giants by harmonizing German engineering precision with American mass production techniques. The Volkswagen Beetle, which became one of history's most successful automobiles, epitomized this synthesis. It was uncomplicated, dependable, capable of being manufactured in immense quantities, and accessible to average families. Former Wehrmacht mechanics who had toiled in American POW camp motor pools returned to Germany equipped with knowledge that proved invaluable. They understood component standardization. They had witnessed efficient parts distribution networks in operation. They had observed how simplified maintenance procedures enhanced vehicle availability. They had learned how designing for manufacturability, rather than absolute perfection, enabled mass production. These insights, acquired through years of maintaining American equipment, profoundly influenced German automotive design for decades to come. The German manufacturers that emerged from the ruins did not seek to replicate pre-war approaches. Instead, they fused German precision with American production efficiency. By the early 1950s, this hybrid methodology was yielding significant results. Volkswagen's production surged from thousands of vehicles annually to hundreds of thousands. Mercedes-Benz adopted assembly line techniques while meticulously preserving its exacting quality standards. BMW restructured its manufacturing processes to emphasize component commonality across its model ranges. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s owed a considerable debt to these fundamental changes. West Germany emerged as an export powerhouse, distributing vehicles worldwide that combined exceptional reliability with affordability. This fusion of German and American methodologies yielded products that neither nation's pre-war philosophy could have achieved independently. U.S. Army historian Hugh M. Cole, who conducted interviews with Wehrmacht generals following their surrender, meticulously documented their perspectives. Cole reported that German military leaders held the Jeep in higher regard than any other element of the formidable American arsenal, surpassing even the B-17 bombers, the Sherman tanks, or the artillery. The humble Jeep, in their view, represented the manufacturing philosophy that had fundamentally won the war. General George C. Marshall himself proclaimed the Jeep to be America's most significant contribution to modern warfare. This was not mere hyperbole. The Jeep embodied principles that revolutionized not only military logistics, but also post-war global manufacturing, standardization, simplification, design for production, and an emphasis on reliability over intricate sophistication. By November of 1943, the U.S. Army had amassed sufficient data on captured Kübelwagens to publish Technical Manual TME 9803, a comprehensive guide for the operation and maintenance of German vehicles. This manual was released on June 6, 1944, D-Day, enabling American forces landing in France to effectively utilize any Kübelwagen they might capture. The Wehrmacht, conversely, never produced an equivalent manual for the Jeep, despite taking possession of thousands of them. They did not deem it necessary. The Jeep was so inherently intuitive that any mechanic could readily understand and operate it. This stark contrast illuminated the fundamental divergence in design philosophies. The Kübelwagen necessitated a detailed manual, translated into English, for American mechanics to comprehend its complex systems. The Jeep, however, required no manual whatsoever for German mechanics to operate and maintain it proficiently. The reunions began in the 1960s. Former members of the Afrika Korps, who had been taken prisoner in Tunisia, gathered to commemorate their fallen comrades. At one such gathering in 1967, an impromptu discussion ensued regarding the vehicles of the war. One former mechanic offered his perspective. The Kübelwagen was, in many respects, superiorly engineered, lighter, more fuel-efficient, and exceptionally suited for desert conditions where its air-cooled engine provided distinct advantages. However, the Jeep was undeniably better designed for the realities of modern warfare. Its four-wheel drive, simpler maintenance, standardized parts, and most crucially, its capacity for production in quantities we could never hope to match. An elderly officer who had commanded a reconnaissance unit nodded in agreement. I recall capturing my first Jeep in 1941. We considered it crude compared to our own vehicles. It took us months to realize that its simplicity was, in fact, elegant efficiency. By 1943, every unit clamored for captured Jeeps because they performed demonstrably better under combat conditions. Another veteran added, "The most disheartening moment for me was grasping that America was producing more Jeeps in a single week than Germany manufactured Kübelwagens in an entire year." That was when I knew we were destined to lose, not due to any specific battle, but from the sheer logic of mathematics. They could replace their losses far more rapidly than we could inflict them. This sentiment represented the prevailing consensus that emerged from such discussions. German soldiers held immense respect for the Kübelwagen as a vehicle. However, they unequivocally recognized that the Jeep, and what it symbolized regarding American production capacity, had been the decisive factor. This was not solely attributable to its combat effectiveness, though it was indeed effective, but rather to what it revealed about the profound disparity in manufacturing capabilities between the belligerents. The Wehrmacht's logistical situation was dire throughout the conflict. By 1943, approximately 80% of German divisions were reliant on horse-drawn transport. The German army entered World War II with 514,000 horses and eventually employed 2.75 million horses and mules during the war, with approximately 1.1 million horses in service at any given time. Over 2 million of these animals perished during the conflict. In stark contrast, American divisions were entirely motorized. Every American unit depended on trucks, not horses, for its logistical operations. This disparity created significant operational advantages that Wehrmacht commanders deeply envied. American supply convoys could cover hundreds of kilometers in a single day. German supply trains, constrained by the walking pace of horses, averaged perhaps 30 kilometers daily under favorable conditions. When Wehrmacht generals analyzed the reasons for their defeat, they consistently pointed to material disparity rather than tactical or strategic miscalculations. German soldiers fought with remarkable skill and courage, and German officers made sound tactical decisions. However, German industry simply could not produce sufficient equipment to sustain prolonged operations against adversaries possessing overwhelming material superiority. The Jeep became the definitive emblem of this disparity because every German soldier who encountered one understood its profound implications. Here was a vehicle so abundant that Americans treated it as expendable, so reliable that it required minimal maintenance, so simple that any soldier could operate and repair it, and so effective that German units preferentially utilized captured jeeps over their own vehicles whenever the opportunity arose. In 1976, the United States Army began replacing the Jeep with the HMMWV. The Jeep had served for an extraordinary 35 years, a remarkable tenure for any military vehicle. Many continued in service with reserve units and Allied militaries for decades thereafter. In that same year, Volkswagen celebrated the production of its 1 millionth Golf. The Golf, much like the Beetle before it, embodied the hard-won lessons derived from both German and American design approaches. Precision engineering harmonized with mass production efficiency, the very synthesis that had revitalized Germany. By the 1980s, West Germany had ascended to become one of the world's preeminent economies. German automotive companies exported millions of vehicles annually. German manufacturing became synonymous with both quality and reliability, but that quality was now augmented by efficient production methods, owing a significant debt to American influence. The final Africa Corps reunion took place in 1998. Fewer than 24 veterans attended, all in their 70s or 80s. They were survivors of a conflict that had concluded more than half a century prior. During the reunion, someone mentioned that a local museum had acquired a meticulously restored Willys MB Jeep. The majority expressed a desire to visit. They gathered around the vehicle, these elderly men who had once been young soldiers in Africa, examining it through the discerning eyes of mechanics and warriors who had come to hold it in profound respect. One veteran reached out to touch the hood, his arthritic fingers tracing the familiar contours of the vehicle. "I captured one of these in 1942, he recalled, and used it for 3 months before I was wounded at El Alamein. It was the finest vehicle I ever drove, superior to anything we possessed." Another nodded in agreement. "I examined one in Tunisia shortly before we surrendered. I couldn't comprehend how uncomplicated the design was. It was then I realized we had been approaching vehicle design entirely incorrectly. Far too complicated, excessively difficult to produce and maintain. They manufactured over 600,000 of them," a third veteran added. "We produced 50,000 Kübelwagens. That ratio tells you everything." They stood in silence for a moment. The Jeep rested before them, now a museum exhibit, its wartime role long concluded. Yet, for these veterans, it represented far more than a mere historical artifact. It was a tangible symbol of the production capacity that had vanquished them, the functional engineering that had proven supremely effective, and the sheer abundance that had utterly overwhelmed scarcity. "We never had vehicles like this," one finally stated. "Not in those numbers, not with that level of reliability, and not designed with the same underlying philosophy. We strove for perfection. They focused on production." This was the profound lesson that Wehrmacht mechanics had absorbed through their direct engagement with captured Jeeps in the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the fields of France. It was a lesson that fundamentally shaped post-war Germany and exerted a significant influence on global industrial development. The Jeep had been more than a mere vehicle. It had served as an education. Wehrmacht mechanics, humbled by their defeat, proved to be exceptionally capable students. They studied not merely how to maintain American equipment, but the underlying reasons for its design choices and what those decisions revealed about the manufacturing philosophy that had ultimately secured victory. That knowledge, painfully acquired, became the bedrock upon which Germany's reconstruction and eventual prosperity were built. Defeat instilled humility. American equipment imparted lessons in functional engineering. The confluence of these elements forged a new German philosophy that served the nation far more effectively than its pre-war arrogance. The narrative of the Wehrmacht mechanics and the Jeep is, in essence, a story of learning through adversity. Pride had initially convinced them that German engineering was inherently superior, that quality would invariably triumph over quantity, and that sophistication would effortlessly overcome simplicity. Reality, however, taught them a different, more potent lesson. American vehicles were not, in most technical specifications, superiorly engineered to their German counterparts. However, they were demonstrably better suited for the demanding realities of modern warfare. They were producible in massive quantities, maintainable by personnel with minimal training, constructed with common, interchangeable parts, and reliably functional even under considerable duress. This inherent functionality, multiplied exponentially by America's immense manufacturing capacity, generated an overwhelming material superiority that no amount of German skill or courage could ultimately surmount. The Wehrmacht possessed excellent soldiers, capable officers, and sophisticated materiel. Yet, it lacked the foundational infrastructure necessary to sustain total war against adversaries who could produce equipment at a rate that far outpaced Germany's capacity for destruction. The mechanics who serviced both German and American vehicles understood this truth through direct, first-hand experience. They had witnessed the operational efficacy of both systems. They had worked with vehicles designed according to fundamentally different philosophies. They knew, unequivocally, which approach proved more effective under the unforgiving conditions of combat. That knowledge directly informed their efforts in rebuilding Germany. When they undertook the training of nascent mechanics, they emphasized the critical lessons learned through hardship. When they offered counsel on operational processes, they advocated for standardization and simplification. When they contributed to the design of new products, they prioritized manufacturability and reliability above all else. The engineers who were instrumental in rebuilding Germany's automotive and machinery sectors had meticulously studied captured American equipment, gained practical experience in POW camp motor pools, and closely observed American manufacturing methodologies. They succeeded in creating a hybrid system, merging German precision with American production efficiency. This hybrid approach proved extraordinarily successful. By the 1970s, West Germany had firmly established itself as a leading global exporter of manufactured goods. This remarkable economic success served as potent validation of the lessons learned from defeat. Germany had decisively abandoned the hubris that had contributed to its catastrophe and embraced a more effective paradigm informed by a thorough study of the victor's operational methods. The Jeep played a critically important role in this profound transformation, offering direct, tangible experience. Every Wehrmacht mechanic who serviced a captured Jeep absorbed invaluable insights into American design philosophy. Every officer who rode in a captured Jeep recognized its inherent advantages. Every soldier who witnessed the sheer abundance of Allied vehicles grasped the truth that propaganda had attempted to conceal. The collective experiences of hundreds of thousands of German servicemen and captives fostered a broad realization. Germany's downfall stemmed not primarily from military shortcomings, but from insufficient material resources. This newfound perspective profoundly influenced their approach to rebuilding. German leadership and technical minds sought to integrate American industrial techniques rather than revert to pre-war methods that had proven wanting. They championed large-scale production over a focus on artisanal craftsmanship. Their engineering efforts prioritized ease of production and dependable performance, eschewing the pursuit of unattainable perfection that complicated manufacturing. Those Wehrmacht mechanics who first encountered Jeeps in the arid North African landscape could scarcely have foreseen the lasting impact of that encounter. At the time, their sole objective was to comprehend an adversary's machinery, evaluate its potential, and ascertain its suitability for their own forces. In this pursuit, they unearthed fundamental truths about industrial capacity and engineering outlooks that would profoundly shape the remainder of their careers and contribute to their nation's revival. The final members of that generation of mechanics have since passed. Their first-hand accounts are no longer accessible, yet the wisdom they acquired is deeply ingrained in operational methodologies across the globe. Each conveyance engineered for straightforward production carries an imprint of the ethos embodied by the Jeep. Every interchangeable component signifies American impact on international specifications. Every emphasis placed on dependable operation resonates with the hard-won insights gleaned from motor pools where Wehrmacht technicians serviced captured American equipment. This represents the enduring legacy of the Jeep, a catalyst for principles that revolutionized manufacturing. It demonstrated that assumptions of inherent superiority warrant critical scrutiny. It underscored that practical efficacy outweighs elaborate design. It proved that designing for efficient fabrication and upkeep yields superior outcomes compared to striving for flawlessness. These lessons were instrumental in Germany's transformation from a vanquished foe to a valued partner. The mechanics, who openly acknowledged never having encountered vehicles comparable to the Jeep, subsequently became pivotal figures in the nation's resurgence. Their acquired humility, born from adversity and refined through careful observation, ultimately served Germany more effectively than the overconfidence that preceded its disaster. In November of 1942, while examining a captured Jeep in the North African desert, Wehrmacht mechanics embarked on a path of revelation that would resonate with an entire generation. The mechanics who operated these captured Jeeps confessed they had never encountered vehicles of its caliber. That candid admission signaled the dawn of a discernment that facilitated the reconstruction of a nation.